The time has come for the Cobra to rise up and reveal himself.
Welcome back, my quiver of capitalists, to AP Economics, presented by Cobranomics, your all-American history teacher, gold standard of economics, le champion of classical liberalism, and sensei of supply side, Professor G here, and welcome to the last unit in the AP Economics curriculum, the Open Economy International Trade. And today we are going to take a look at why do countries engage in trade and terms of trade. And the key here is what David Ricardo calls free and fair trade. That if countries can openly trade with each other on free terms and fair terms, then each nation is going to benefit. And today we are going to take a look at how do nations calculate those terms of trade and how do they mathematically benefit. So let's go over some vocabulary before we get into our math. Terms of trade is the ratio of trade that is acceptable to both parties. So we are going to use opportunity cost to determine comparative advantage and then go back to the opportunity cost to determine what would be an acceptable ratio of trade per country based on their comparative advantage and specialization. Why do nations do this? It must be acceptable based off their opportunity costs, and if it is acceptable based off their opportunity costs, that means they are each quantifiably more efficient and should each only produce that product and specialize in that product. One will export, the other will import, and if they do this, based on their terms of trade, each nation will achieve a gains from trade because they will have a post-production trade, a post-production amount of goods and services that is greater than what they can normally do on their own, which is what the PPC shows us. The PPC literally says that it visualizes that any point along the PPC is a maximum a single nation can do with the resources it has. So this represents the maximum combinations of goods and services that that nation can produce with its current resources and technology. But the point of free and fair trade based off of terms of trade is that a nation will be able to achieve a point outside of its PPC because of the gains of trade. If each nation is specializing and then trading based on a ratio that is fair for both countries, each countries will end up with more than they normally could have on their own, thus a point outside the PPC. And this is very important for in terms of your multiple choice or free response questions. Remember, trade is a point outside the PPC and not a shift of the PPC. A shift of the PPC to the right would be if the nation discovered new quality or quantity of resources and technology at a long-term or permanent basis. Terms of trade is a short-term new amount of goods and services based on the trade, on the terms of trade. So a point outside is trade. They're still using their current resource. The resources have not changed. They are just specializing and now using those resources more efficiently and ending up with more goods and services that they normally would have been able to do on their own. So now we understand why nations are doing it. They are doing it. They are going to trade to achieve a point outside their PPC so that they can have more than they can normally accomplish on their own. But now we have to take a look at how do they determine free and fair terms of trade. So we're going to go back to our opportunity cost, comparative advantage, and specialization. Now, let's do some math. Let's take a look at this scenario in which we have two countries, USA and Israel, and we have bushels of oranges and bushels of apples. Let's say if the USA specializes in oranges, it can produce 75 bushels, and if it specializes in apples, it can produce 150 bushels. Israel can produce 100 bushels in a given time period if it specializes on that, or it can produce 400 bushels in a given time period specializing on just bushels. Now, let's take a look at a scenario in which we have to use a production schedule to determine fair terms of trade between both nations. So we have two countries, the United States and Israel, and we have two different units of goods they are producing. We have bushels of oranges and bushels of apples. And the production schedule says that in one day, America could specialize in and make 75 bushels of oranges or 150 bushels of apples, versus Israel, who can do 100 bushels of oranges or 400 bushels of apples. That's each just focus on that item and specialize on it. So we have to find out, well, what would be acceptable terms of trade if each nation wanted to trade, and who should trade what? So first, before we do that, remember, going back to solving for comparative advantage, we first have to make a chart that is exactly like this chart, except we have to add opportunity cost of. So we're going to solve for opportunity cost of bushels of oranges and opportunity cost of 1 bushel of apples. Okay, so and since this is an output problem, because the variant is units produced, the bushels, we have to do y over x, given up over chosen. So let's do some math. And we have, so for the USA, we have to make 1 bushel, 1 bushel of orange. It is choosing to produce bushels of oranges, so we put the 75 on the bottom. It is choosing the oranges. We put what it's giving up on the top, the apples, 150, and we get 2. What does that mean? That means to produce 1 bushel of orange, it is sacrificing 2 bushels of apples. So America's opportunity cost to make 1 bushel of orange, to choose making oranges, would be to sacrifice 2 bushels of apples. And you see that here. If America chooses to make 75 bushels of oranges, it's giving up double that amount. Now let's do the reverse, and again, you could flip the numerator and denominator and just do the reciprocal, but it's always good just to do the math and make sure your math is correct. If you flip the reciprocal, you might make a mistake or miss a mistake. So, for bushels of apples, in this case America is choosing to make apples, so we're putting the 150 on the bottom. If it's choosing to make apples, it is sacrificing oranges. We're putting the 75 on top. So now what do we have? We have the opportunity cost of 1 bushel of apple. The opportunity cost of 1 bushel of apple is 1/2 an orange, a bushel of orange. Now, let's take a look. So we have America's opportunity cost of each item, of 1 unit of each item. Now let's take a look at Israel's. Israel, to make 1 bushel of orange, the opportunity cost of 1 bushel of orange. So we're going to put oranges on the bottom. We have 100 bushels. Choosing bushels, and we are sacrificing apples. Put 400 on top. 400 over 100 is 4 bushels of apples. So this means the opportunity cost of Israel to produce 1 bushel of oranges means they are actually sacrificing 4 bushels of apples. And we see that here. To make 100 oranges, they sacrifice 4 times that amount in 400 bushels. And let's do the reverse. To make apples, let's put, now we're choosing apples, so we're putting 400 on the bottom.